continue the momentum of Darren's presentation and jump straight into our first panel discussion of the day. Each of the panels will be led by an LSU expert. We'll have about 50 minutes for a conversation between the panelists, and then the final 10 minutes of the discussion, our panelists will answer questions from the audience. And our first panel will explore how AI is revolutionizing business operations across Louisiana, from automation to data-driven decision-making. Our panelists will discuss the opportunities and challenges of integrating AI into the business strategy and the evolving workforce landscape. Moderating this session is Dr. Andrew Schwarz, Professor of Information Systems in the Ourso College of Business. And please join me in welcoming Dr. Schwarz and our panelists, Josh Fleig, Henry Hayes, and Jude Melville.
So my name is Dr. Schwarz. I'm a professor in the Ourso College of Business. And I'm going to begin by asking each of our panelists just to introduce yourselves and tell us what you do.
Good morning, my name is Henry Hayes. I run a company here in Baton Rouge called DisruptREADY, which is a full stack AI development shop. For fun, I teach a class here on campus in the Ourso College that combines kind of private sector business ideas with teaching our computer science kids how to build large language models. Two of my students are in the front row, A+, and so yeah, happy to be here.
Good morning, happy to be here as well. My name is Jude Melville. I'm CEO of B1 Bank, which is a commercial bank headquartered here in Baton Rouge, but we're all over Louisiana and Texas. And, you know, my wife asked me when I told her that I was going to come be on this panel, she said, why? And I was stumped. I said, well, I don't actually know, but maybe sometimes having somebody involved that's not in the AI world might be a slightly different perspective. I will say I had a neat moment last night. I have a couple girls, and one of them's a senior in high school, and so it's been a while since I was able to actually help her with her homework. And for some reason yesterday, she's studying for a physics test, and for some reason she wanted me to help her. And I had not really helped her since they began using ChatGPT as part of their schoolwork. And you know, at first I was like, well, I can't help you, but I'll sit here. But then what I realized after we started using ChatGPT was that it actually enabled me to help her. So it wasn't that the model was helping her, it was the model enabled me to be able to know just enough to be able to help her figure out. So it was really an uplifting moment. And if that's what AI is about, then I think it's pretty exciting.
Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm Josh Fleig. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer for Louisiana Economic Development. I'm a proud LSU Tiger, and I'm also in the faculty of the School of Art at LSU, where I teach a digital synthesis class every semester. Professional background prior to my last 13 years in economic development, I was I guess what the kids call an AI user experience designer. So I wrote and produced text-to-television campaigns for reality TV shows. So if you voted people off of an island on a network television show in the aughts or the early teens, I probably did it. So that's my professional background prior to this. Is you know, where art and computer science sort of meet the intersection right there in media.
Fantastic, great panelists, of course. So Henry, we're going to start with you. So we heard all about why you should adopt AI and how companies should be thinking about AI. Let's play the skeptical devil's advocate. Let's say that I'm not going to do it. I'm going to say this is not the fourth revolution. What are the consequences of a company not embracing AI in today's world?
How much time do we have? No, I'd say, look, so we specialize in people who want to go from the Flintstones to the Jetsons, but can barely spell AI, so this is a really good question. Look, everyone in the audience, if you're a business person or even in academia, you could trace back your history, and there were innovations that you just stepped into. Like, you're all using Wi-Fi right now, and nobody really knows how that works, but it's ubiquitous and you use it. The problem is, all those innovations, we had time. If we're doing this in the early 2000s, and Dr. Schwarz is like, all right, you need an e-commerce strategy, because this internet's gonna stick around. Like, yeah, okay, guys, this is so much much more, it's so much faster, and it's moving so quickly, that if you don't have a strategy, it's real simple. The line is forming, so you can assume that your competitors in your business do have a strategy, and so the longer you wait, the less choice you will have. So that has effect on your customers, that has effect on their families, and then it has effect on your business, frankly, being around. Now the flip side of that is, I think this is the best time ever for opportunity. Because if you're the small shop and you're like, gosh, if we just had more resource, or if we just had more people or more capital, that's today. Because I always tell our customers, imagine if Einstein was in your back pocket at recall, what would you do? Because that's where we are. And so if you don't have a strategy, again, your choices are just limited.
All right, so Jude, Henry's talking about speed to market and the need to keep up with competitors. Sitting in the position where you are, do you feel it? What is your experience like as you think about strategizing with AI?
I do, but you know, my favorite business book is Only the Paranoid Survive. So I worry about everything as a banker. That's kind of what I get paid to do. So I don't know that it's a qualitatively different worry than many other worries are. I will say that, you know, I think it's maybe less about coming up with a new strategy and more about learning the language and adapting your current strategies. And we've been using AI in some form for years at the bank. We just didn't call it AI really, but so it's not. I think we have to be careful not to think of it as this other world out there. And part of being able to tackle it is to try to make it real and tangible. And one of the ways we can do that is by not being overwhelmed by the fact that you need this AI strategy. AI is a tool, a series of tools. And having a business strategy that then utilizes tools that happen to be AI is what we need to do. I would, as a little bit, I guess, devil's advocate like you were playing though, I worry a little bit about moving too fast in the sense that it's easy to get locked in. And I think one of the panelists on the last section mentioned this, but it's very easy, and in my world, banking world, we have a lot of investments in technology. And what typically happens is that the companies that we deal with want to have long-term contracts, right? But the speed that Henry's talking about means that the technology 2 years from now is going to be different than it is today. So I think part of what we need to do, part of our strategy needs to be to actually not move too quickly, because you could easily end up locked into something that's not the ultimate solution.
Sure, that balance between the business value that we talked about before and the need for speed is a tough one to crack, right? And the state's starting to think about it in terms of small businesses, and they're concerned, obviously, that with the big announcement that was alluded to on stage here previously, right? With the world eyes on the Super Bowl, a huge announcement in the world of AI that really did rock the news in a great way. Josh, can you kind of tell us a little about the vision, how the state's approaching, preparing businesses like Jude's and Henry's to get ready for AI, and how the state is thinking about this?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is going to come to come as a shock to many of you, but I took the job in July 1 of last year, and I very quickly found out that the state of Louisiana had no plan or strategy for artificial intelligence. So it was a joke. It wasn't a shock to anyone, but very quickly we'd been working the Meta project that many of you might have seen in the papers in Richland Parish, right next door to Monroe, for a few months at that point. And we knew that this project was coming, and we knew that we needed to ride the wave of that announcement. And that announcement is tremendous for Richland Parish. It's tremendous when we start looking at the financial impact to the state of Louisiana. It's $10 billion, it's 500 jobs. You know, making an average of $88,000 in Richland Parish is substantial. And you know, a few thousand construction jobs. But at the end of the day, it's a data center. Now, is it a data center that's paid for by artificial intelligence? Absolutely. This is capital that's going into the ground in Louisiana because of generative AI, because of literally the llama model that I think the last panelists were talking about. But it is a data center, and our future as a state should not be dependent upon building more data centers, right? It's not the type of jobs we need. You can't get enough data center jobs. If we packed all the vacant land in Louisiana up with data centers, we still wouldn't have enough jobs, right? It's not the key. It's not the strategy to capturing our share of this growth and this investment globally. But politically, people are very excited about a data center in Richland Parish. We need to ride that wave, we need to ride that investment to build something much more interesting at the application layer of artificial intelligence. Like, what are we actually doing with all these tools? How are they impacting our economy? How are we helping to make small businesses more productive in Louisiana? So if we're gonna take some dollars to do something interesting in the name of artificial intelligence, it's not gonna be chase more data centers. It's gonna be use the tools to make us more productive. So we kicked off the Louisiana Institute for Artificial Intelligence a couple weeks ago at the Super Bowl. And there's a couple reasons why we did this. One, it was to say very discreetly, very directly that this is a strategy for our department. We want to make sure that we're leading the way in how the state is thinking about investing in AI. And we wanted to make sure that we were planting a flag in the ground and saying it is about the application layer. It's about solving Louisiana problems with artificial intelligence. It's not about getting distracted and focusing on stuff like data centers as our strategy, right? It's about applied research, so solving those Louisiana problems that the rest of the globe can learn from, right? And this is multi-dimensional. This can be poverty, it can be education, it can be water, you name it. But like, what the hell are we doing with this stuff, right? As opposed to let's just go put some more, NVIDIA servers or NVIDIA chips in some racks. So I think that was important. It's also important from a workforce perspective. How are we retooling, reskilling, all of those questions? No one has answers for this stuff yet, but how are we thinking about that through our department? How are we working with other state agencies that think about this stuff, that do lead workforce initiatives, to make sure that we have a seat at that table and that we're working collectively on the workforce component as well. Commercialization is another huge part of this initiative. Great, so we learn how to solve some problems with artificial intelligence, right, through this applied research. How do we turn that into a company that makes money for someone in the state of Louisiana, right? So how do we invest in some of those early stage companies, leveraging AI to solve Louisiana problems so that now someone can make a living and that thing can grow into something that matters and impacts our economy? And the last piece is policy. How are we setting a standard in Louisiana that's pro-innovation in artificial intelligence? What keeps me up at night is we're gonna do something stupid to prevent innovation in AI, right? From a policy perspective, because people are scared of this stuff, right? It is scary. They're coming for our jobs. They're, it's gonna take over. Look, I'll tell you this quick anecdote. I was in a committee hearing a couple years ago before I was even in this role. And there was a elected official, state rep, who was concerned about musicians in her district, and I won't name her district, but ceding their intellectual property to AI, right? They're like, oh, the machine's gonna, kill our musician, or people are gonna rip off, their IP. The machine's gonna learn how to replicate their music and all. And so she was trying to introduce legislation to somehow, prevent that. But she wasn't equipped to do that, right? And the downstream effect of some of this limiting legislation is going to stifle innovation in our state. So making sure that we have a seat at the table to drive pro-innovation policy at the state level so that we don't do that, so that when Waymo wants to come here like they did on Monday of this week and start testing self-driving cars in New Orleans, they can do it. And that we're not the 50th state to have autonomous vehicles.
Can I follow up with something that Josh said? Let me put my foot down on the following. The next time you hear someone say AI is going to take jobs, chew on this. I got 3 of my kids up front, okay, that today I can employ as an AI PM. Now you just heard those 4 letters ever for the first time. Artificial Intelligent Project Manager. And this guy works with Shell currently, and these 2 were in my class in the last few semesters. So we've now created a brand new job. And I can't train and hire them fast enough. So the next time someone tells you at the crawfish bowl of the baseball game, or, oh, no, it's not. It's not, and it's going to be a 10x ripple of jobs coming. So that's a mindset thing, and I can tell you firsthand because I can't find them and train them fast enough. Because when we drop off, B1's one of our customers, when we dropped it off, I'm not gonna say, hey, Jude, good luck. Have at it. I hope all your 800 employees.
That was the first question I asked when he wanted to come work for us. Were you going to give me something and leave?
Exactly, because that would be, I'd cut my neck to do that. So I'm going to hire one of these kids to say, okay, guys, take it over. Make sure Nancy, the 51-year-old, can kind of figure this out. So that's just on the jobs piece. I'm really passionate about that, and it's a mindset thing. So Sorry, I jumped in.
Yeah, no, I wanted to actually add on as well. You know, when you think about the role of government and state government, I think one of the things that we need to be careful about is that over the decades, we have focused our economic development on certain things and recruiting companies to do certain things, which is great. We need to do that, and we need to create an environment in which we can develop. Everything that you said, I think, is great. But I want to also emphasize that I think we have to also remember that you know, there are about 100,000 small businesses in Louisiana, and a majority of them are one or two people. Right? We forget sometimes that when we talk about AI, we're always thinking about big companies and we're thinking about tech companies. And it's important that we develop that and provide an environment in which that can flourish here. But it's also important that we not forget all those businesses that aren't going to be innovative in tech. They're going to actually be using the tech to do more of what they do. Will Campbell's over here. He runs our foundation, which mentors micro businesses, and we've mentored over 750 over the past 2 years, and not one of them is going to invent anything that's proprietary. But they're all going to hopefully have the opportunity to use the technology to magnify what they're already doing. But what they need, I think, is somebody to help them navigate. And so one of the roles for the state, I think, ought to be how do we create a support infrastructure that small businesses can come and ask for explanations and ask for navigational help. I'm a big enough company. We have about 800 people. We're about $8 billion in assets that I can have an IT person who's very good at what they do. And then I can also afford to occasionally hire folks like Henry to come in and supplement that. Most businesses in Louisiana are not in a position to be able to do that. And that seems to me like a role that's not as sexy or as glamorous as some of the other things that we spend time talking about, but I think just as important.
Actually, so I'm going to continue this conversation. And so they're both talking about human capital, right, human knowledge, and the importance for transitioning and upskilling our workforce. And we know that this is going to be one of the biggest challenges at the state level as we start to think about developing an industry, right? So I've been traveling the state, and I got to say, it's amazing what I'm seeing in terms of opportunities and excitement and just ideas. But how is the state, Josh, thinking about this concept of economic development, workforce development, skills to help the problem that Jude identified, which is a labor shortage?
Yeah. So we got fortunate. I don't know if you followed the BEAD or the Gumbo program in Louisiana, but it's effectively dollars that were received that were COVID stimulus dollars that all states got a prescriptive amount of money to extend broadband networks throughout their state. So, you know, hard to reach places, rural places, places where the telcos may or may not go because there's not enough kind of market demand in that region. So Louisiana actually did a really good job of getting their deployment dollars out very quickly. Under this Gumbo 2.0 program, it was about a $1.3, $1.4 billion program in total. So all of the dollars to actually build those new networks have been earmarked. What's left over is a few $100 million that the federal government says, do something cool with these new networks. I mean, that's kind of what it says, right? Well, it's 2025. I mean, like, what doesn't require a network to do something cool? So the governor basically split those dollars up between state agencies. Each state agency had to build a plan of what they're going to do with their, what they call BEAD money, effectively. So our plan is, and there's $60 million in this bucket for our department, and it's to upgrade. Our goal is 5,000 small businesses with better tools. And so what are those tools? So these are what we're trying not to do with this is give out fish, right? I use the teach someone to fish analogy versus just giving them the fish. But I don't want to buy a bunch of Square terminals for pizza parlors in Rayville because I don't think that's super helpful. I think what I'm much more interested in doing is
unless you own a pizza parlor in Rayville.
Right.
We do have a bank in Rayville, so I'm partial.
Look, they need it, but I'd much rather provide access to AI with some support services to just make small businesses more productive. And I mean, this is a productivity play, 110%. So how do we use these dollars to build a network, to build integrators, an army of integrators and service providers and people that can work in the communities to upgrade small businesses so that they can leverage artificial intelligence in their company to just be more productive, to have access to better tools so that they can do things themselves, so that they can do more themselves. That's the goal, assuming we don't get doged to death by our friend Elon and these dollars. I'm pretty confident they'll continue to flow, but it is important that we leverage these dollars to do something interesting in this space to make our small businesses more productive, and AI is the key there.
Absolutely agree. And part of this is going to be experimentation, right? Which is, I think what we'll see is when we unleash this, we're going to see a real interesting kind of experimentation from businesses, from entrepreneurs, from students across the board, right? And so I think, Henry, we talked before that this is almost like bring your own device again. There's a lot of innovation in this space is being driven by the users who are using ChatGPT to write emails or to create market analysis, right? So is that true? Are we finding that this is like a bring your own device kind of idea? And if so, what is the implication? What are your thoughts?
So McKinsey put out a set of data right at the end of December, so 6 weeks ago. They looked at all the generations at work, from the boomers to Gen X. Guys, and the question was, are you using your own protocol device at work? The lowest percentage was the boomers, so your parents, 69%. That's the lowest. Everybody else was in the 70s and 80s, which means if you own a business and you don't have a clear strategy, they do. And that means the genie's out of the bottle and it's time to get your head around that. Because to Chad and the panel before, there is consequence to putting data in the ether. And it's not so much that your competitors grab it, it's that you are the product. And so the more we go without having guardrails, and frankly, I think it's leadership. It's your people want it, so step up. And it should change. The ball's always going to bounce down the sidewalk. So I think that when McKinsey put that data out, that was eye-opening. That the lowest was 69%. So people are making up their own rules.
Absolutely. Now, Jude, that's got to be scary because now we're sitting on all this corporate data, right? Which is the potential to be exposed in a way that we're not like Napster again, right? So how do you think about data privacy and security? Does that keep you up at night? Like, what do you think about with that?
Yeah, well, it's definitely a little bit scary, but I think you used the right word, which is leadership, and that's a role that a lot of us that aren't technologists can still play in a way that adds value. My role as CEO is not so much to know exactly what to do; it's to create an environment in which the people that do know what to do feel good about doing it, and feel encouraged to do it. And the problem is not that we have a lot of people doing their own thing. It's that they might continue doing their own thing because they don't feel welcomed to do that thing within the context of the business environment. And so I view my role as a leader in our company to keep pushing us forward, because it's going to happen one way or another. And I'd rather it happen within guardrails and in ways that we can actually leverage each other's talents versus not. I do think though that one thing we have to figure out as a society, and it's not just AI, it's also social media, and it's how we absorb our news, is that I think that, so one thing that's become apparent to me is that AI is not always right? But I think the difference between AI and a Google search is that AI sounds like it's right, whereas the Google search gives you a lot of things that might be right? You kind of know that. So we as consumers of this technology, whether that's personally or through a part of our business, I think have to be much more willing to dig into the answers to see if they're actually true or not, right? So we have to be more proactive to make sure that the information that we're getting is not just usable, but it's usable in the correct way. And that's really a societal challenge, not just a challenge that I have as a small business person.
Gently challenge. Gently. I agree with you. However, if you're new to this, Jude's right, but don't let that in your mind go, see, you need to stop and wait. That's my only caveat. I agree with you, but I think, look, don't kid yourself. When something like this comes to your lap, especially as you get older and you're working, part of your brain is going, I don't get this, run. And the running is, you see an image with 6 fingers, and you go, AI did that, it's fake, this is a scam. Because your brain, yeah, it's funny. Because your brain's trying to keep you safe. Guys, that is dangerous. So I would just say, I agree with you, but whenever I hear the AI is wrong, and I'm a technologist, so I'm like, compared to what? The human? How often do we get it wrong?
Well, that's part of why I say it's a societal problem. It's not just the AI. It's are we actually using information in a way that we believe in? Maybe it's not even the truth, but it's just, is this really what represents what we want to do? And
Yeah.
you know, when I was in the military, one of the kind of catchwords was preparation is the key to air power. So, you know, yes, you shouldn't wait just to wait or because you're scared. But what you might do is take 5 extra minutes to think about, is this correct or not, or does it feel correct? And then move forward, in which case you might actually move faster because you might not have to start over or you might not create problems. So I certainly wouldn't advocate pulling back because you're scared. I would advocate interacting more energetically, which in my mind means actually thinking about what you're doing as opposed to just taking what it spits out.
Absolutely, and this is a huge issue, but you both brought up the issue of guardrails, and I think that's an interesting one to explore. And I know we're gonna have a whole thing on public policy next, but Jude, while you're here, Josh, I gotta ask you, how are you thinking, it says it keeps you up at night, how are you thinking about regulation, state level, federal level, where do you come down, what do you think?
Yeah, so no regulation is better right now, and I don't know that like this is Josh personal philosophy talking here, right? But my challenge with regulating things when they're moving this quickly and no one really understands them, and I'm pretty confident we don't have a lot of policymakers that are experts in this. And it's not a diss, right? It's just a function of we're not coming from a place where we've got a lot of like institutional knowledge on stuff like AI. It's better not to do anything at this point. And I'll go back to the Waymo example for a minute. So I reached out to Waymo back in November of this year. So, and I basically said, look, and is everyone familiar with Waymo? It's Google's big self-driving car company. They've put $15 billion into this. They're doing 150,000 paid rides per week across 5 different markets. It's about 1 million miles a week that they're driving with no driver in the car, right? So you pull up in this retrofitted Jaguar. It's got like a LiDAR sensor on it, a bunch of cameras. And the steering wheel is just rocking and rolling. There's no one sitting right there. I took one in San Francisco last summer, and you're at a red light next to an Uber driver, and you think, this is it for you, buddy. It's phenomenal. It's a phenomenal experience. It works extremely well. And you look at the data, and it suggests that it is by far the safest way to drive around on 4 wheels in the world, right? It's just overwhelmingly positive. But the reality is what you see on social media, if it hits your feed and you go down the rabbit hole, or like, you know, roving gangs in San Francisco spray painting Waymos and stuff, and like, you know, it's such a narrow fraction of the reality. Or the next time that someone actually gets injured in a Waymo, it's gonna be a headline, right? It's gonna be a headline all over the place. It's still the safest way to travel on 4 wheels on planet Earth, right? There's no doubt about it. But what we have to balance there when it comes to guardrails and regulation is it is a very long game, educating lawmakers that this is good for our state and our people. It's good for access to getting from A to B, right? And it's safer. It's an easier way to travel. It decreases congestion. There's all sorts of like positive reasons why we want autonomous vehicles in Louisiana. But if we do nothing, right? If I didn't bring Waymo in the front door, introduce them to the Department of Transportation, introduce them to elected officials in New Orleans in their test area, begin this conversation now, if we're on our heels on this and somebody gets injured in a Waymo in Austin, Texas, it makes headlines. Some lawmaker in Louisiana sees it in their Twitter feed and begins to introduce anti-autonomous driving legislation. We got a problem. We will be the 50th state to get it, right? So when I think about regulation in this space, no regulation. Let's get started. Let's test stuff. Let's work with people that are making like actual things with artificial intelligence to understand how it's going to impact our communities before we decide to just, you know, pass some legislation to restrict stuff. So that's why we're in these conversations. It's why I reached out to guys like Waymo, and we're going to keep doing that, and I will keep pushing on this. Let's not pass regulations. Let's not build guardrails before we know what the hell all this stuff is.
And yeah, what did Metallica and U2 do? Pitched a fit. This is the end of music as we know it, right? 2024, the recording industry has never made more money on their tours, ever. Those black t-shirts we buy for $50 that say Taylor Swift Eras Tour, I know, some of you went. So they freaked out, to Josh's point, for what? It's like, take the long game here. How do you think that our friends in Europe are feeling right now about the GDPR? I mean, Europe was already tough enough to innovate, and now they've got 1.5 arms tied behind their back. Because the Brazilians, the Chinese, everybody around the world, this is a global technology, they're not slowing down. So I'm 100% agreeing with Josh on that.
Yeah.
And could I add one thing? I'm actually generally in agreement too. I think we have a tendency as the government to act like we know more than we do, and we end up more unintended consequences than not, in my perspective. But I think there's a follow-on question, because there's gonna be regulation, right? It's either gonna be sooner or it's gonna be later, but there's gonna be regulation. The question to me, as somebody who lives his life every day being regulated as a banker by 4 or 5 different regulators, the question for me is not, are we going to regulate it or are we not going to regulate it, but it's who is going to regulate it and how. And I think one of the challenges that we have as a government that believes, or historically has believed in making sure that there are a lot of different competing interests that have control, we end up with a fragmented regulatory system, which is not the best way to actually tackle something as big as this. Because you can't, partly it's just reality. They can't attract the right talent to be able to understand what it is that they're trying to regulate. And so when every agency and every little group is trying to regulate it on their own, you end up kind of with lowest common denominator, in my opinion, in terms of their ability to actually do it. I would prefer, and I'll give you a concrete example, is that in the banking space, 3-4 years ago, they basically called a cease and desist on banks partnering with fintechs. And it wasn't necessarily because there's any problem with banks partnering with fintechs, it's because they weren't prepared to regulate it properly. And so we had to take a step back, and we're probably 3, 4, 5 years behind where we could be in terms of actually helping consumers use technology to access their funds. And it's not, again, it's not because they did it on purpose, it was because they were understaffed and weren't prepared to regulate in the right way. So I think that what we need to do is create a different regulatory relationship for things that are as technologically complicated and as meaningful as this. Let's use the NSA, for example, to help us figure out how to regulate banks and their use of technology, as opposed to the FDIC feeling like they need to go hire a lot of coders to try to figure out how to tell us not to code, right? So to me, it's not about do we regulate or do we not. It's when the doging is done, the next step is rebuilding, and can we rebuild the regulatory framework in the right way? That's the question, I think.
Yeah, it's exactly why we created the Louisiana Institute for Artificial Intelligence as a 501c3 that's independent of state government. Look, the reality is I work for this administration. It's not going to last forever. I mean, at some point I'm going to be out of a job, and the new group might not feel the same way about stuff. So it needs to be independent for all those reasons. If it's going to make policy decisions, drive policy strategy. My inspiration for this too is it's like the Water Institute of the Gulf guys, if you're familiar with that organization. It functions better, faster, smarter as an independent organization because water is sort of bigger than a state agency, one university, all these sort of things. I feel the same way about AI. It's bigger than one of these. It shouldn't be politicized. It should be able to move faster. And for all those reasons, I think independence is important.
Absolutely. And Henry, you and I have been on the media a lot talking about this issue of regulation and I think we're on the same pattern. But what's really interesting about this panel and about this group is you have university, government, and the private sector all coming together. And to me, that bears out a very good promise of opportunity for the future with questions like about the role that universities could play, 2 different questions about that. So this is really a chance, it's every single address I always end the same way, which is let's create something unique in Louisiana so people look at us and say, what's going on down the bayou, and mean it in a good way. So as we think about the future, and as we think about all these challenges, what does the future look like? What does the future workforce look like that's AI enabled, where we do have agent-based organizations, or where we are working alongside of AI? What does that look like, and what is the implication of that for business?
So several things. One, this is the small guy's silver bullet. Okay, if you're, again, small to medium size and you want to punch above your weight, this is it. This is the greatest disruptor of any of our lifetimes. I know that to be true. Number 2, I began teaching at LSU because I lost a bet to the dean. I was banging on LSU. Look, our grandfathers' grandfathers were educated in the same way. Some guy got up, gave you information in a room like this. You gave a midterm and a final, and they gave you a grade. Rinse, repeat, spring and fall, right? Little summer, 18 to 22-year-olds. And I pushed the dean to say, there's 250,000 living LSU alum, and they have questions about this. And so he said, I dare you, give me your syllabus. And I was like, don't waste my time. And he said, come on. So Roy Haggerty said, let's go, let's greenlight it. So I see Dr. Jack now in the back. She's one of my heroes. She works at the lake. They had vision. This year we have BASF, the largest chemical company in the world, Shell, and Entergy, paying to be on our campus to get access to our students. That to me is disruptable. So that's where private meets public to get ahead. Because guys, I mean, the oil and gas stuff that's about to happen, the LNG to the west of where you live, is coming. And so we can ride this wave. But I think it's non-traditional collections like that. Everybody wins. The students win, the lake wins, and LSU wins. So I think, to me, it's the non-traditional collections that will win going forward.
Agreed. Josh, thoughts?
Yeah, so this is sort of counter to a lot of what I'm doing, and certainly even maybe doesn't belong in the business, panel. I think the ability for this to improve K-12 education is I think the biggest application we've got in Louisiana today, honestly. And I'm not a K-12 education guy. I spent time in a high school classroom. I taught high school for 4 years when I first graduated from LSU. But it's hard as hell. I mean, educators and people in this space know this, that it's hard because it's a one-to-many problem, and it's hard to personalize learning and personalize education. It gets harder when the conditions are harder. Poverty makes it more challenging. Rural areas make it more challenging. All of these factors are acute in a place like Louisiana, right? We know we're a poor state. Education is a massive challenge. AI's ability to personalize learning at a very early age, if we can crack that nut, I think that's the key to curing poverty in Louisiana, which is our #1 challenge. That's why I'm super bullish on it from that angle.
I would just offer 2 very similar perspectives, I suppose. But one is that I agree. I think it harbors a golden age for small businesses, and Louisiana is nothing if not a state that is dominated by small businesses. So if we can help those small businesses do their thing, that's going to be very exciting. We might be entering an age in which CEOs don't brag about the size of their company, but they brag about what they can do per person, right? Which is a pretty exciting place to be. And the last panelists were talking about answered a question about the challenges of retaining institutional memory. But as somebody that runs a fairly bureaucratic organization, as much as I don't want it to be, it is a bank. My bigger issue is how to erase institutional memory, right? Because as a bigger company, you get stuck in these ways of doing things. And as a small business, 1, 2, 5, 10 people, you have a much better chance of actually taking advantage of these opportunities. And I think that's very exciting for our state. The other thing that I would say is that the reason that I'm a business person is that I believe that I can add meaning to other people's lives by giving jobs, giving them jobs and making sure that they have meaningful employment. And I think the opportunity with AI really comes down to we can make so many more jobs feel so much more meaningful. You know, if we can take some of the stuff it's not about fun or not fun, it's stuff that's repetitive, it's stuff that you don't get the feeling of that, hey, I'm adding value to what I'm doing to this process. That's where work becomes work, right? And so, you know, one of the opportunities we have by embracing AI, I think, is to create a lot of jobs that actually provide meaning to the folks that are filling them, which I think will make us better off as a state and as a country.
100% agree. I mean, for a long time, Josh, I've shared my concern of the digital divide, right? Meaning, I was always been concerned that we'd be left behind, or that certain populations would be left behind as we advance AI. So it's good to hear that this vision for all, you know, and I've been advocating AI for all for a long time, but it's going to come down to us all truly working together in these intersectoral collaborations that are public-private, that are government, education, that are us all working together and getting on one page. So I think that's going to be important for us all moving forward. So that's kind of good to hear. All right, so I think I want to turn it over to the audience now. I think we have about 15 minutes for questions. So if you have a question, raise your hand.
Hi, I work for government, and this question's for Josh. So I'm a deputy director at the Department of Health, and we've been trying to introduce AI into the department now for 1.5 to 2 years. And the Office of Technology Services has a hardline anti-AI policy. So every time we try to buy, they say no. So what can you do with unspoken regulation like that when you talk about K through 12, Department of Education is facing that same thing. We can't, as a state, do any technology purchase without OTS, and they're anti-cloud, much less anti-AI.
So is there anybody from OTS in the room? I'm going to get in trouble for saying this maybe, but I'll tell you exactly what we did. We introduced a bill last spring in the legislative session to exempt our department from OTS. Yeah, that's how bad it was. And the governor signed it into law, and guess what? We're migrating off of OTS as we speak, because it's that big of a challenge. Now, is that the real fix? No, we should fix OTS, but we have to move faster. It's a real challenge, but let's build some system around it somehow. I'd love to work with you guys on an experiment. Maybe we leverage the AI Institute to do something adjacent so that we can go around OTS on this.
I go one step further. Did you see the study 2 weeks ago that came out in the Lancet?
Yes.
105,000 Swedish women regularly going for their mammographies. An AI was added to the front of that kind of diagnosis chain. 29% more cancers caught. That means that 29% of those women that would leave that facility saying, you're negative. So it's early, but it's not. Because to me, that's, and there's particularly, it's really good at the T1 cell, which is very treatable early on. I mean, I think it's negligence, quite frankly.
Yeah, I agree. I absolutely think we need to fix systemic issues like our Office of Technology Services not working for the things that we need to do. I'm not advocating we fully ignore it and exempt every department, but this is moving so quickly that we need to do two things in parallel. We need to continue to try to fix OTS for sure, but in the meantime, let's go around it and run an experiment through a third party that can actually get some work going. I'm all about doing that, all about partnering with other state agencies to try to figure that out.
So I'd love to partner with you. I think some of it is what Jude said, right? Anti-cloud because we don't have the staff and we don't have the department skill set to manage and regulate that. We don't have the knowledge and skill set to regulate mobile apps. We don't have the knowledge and skill set to regulate AI. So if we can't solve that systemically in government, then I don't know how we can bring that to the people, much less to the small business.
Good morning. I'm an 88 graduate of LSU, and my son is a recent 2025 graduate of College of Business and Finance, and we both use AI. I use it from a professional consultant's perspective, where like I'm getting policies written from the consultants or business I'm helping. My son tends to move, he can get something done in 2 or 3 seconds. But how do we make sure moving forward, using it as a tool, but still not losing the ability to be able to think analytically, the ability to be able to write? So I still force him, he just recently graduated, I can't require him, but I encourage him to say, I just need you to write a simple paragraph, and it does make my life much easier, but I still have to go back and validate the information. Sometimes a lot of it is not even correct, or I'll say to him, hey, how can I shorten this and put this a little bit quicker to get back what I want? But how do we move forward and make sure the human person doesn't lose the ability to think? And because at some point, the information that goes in has to be validated and come back out and still use that, right? And then I work with a lot of, like Jude said, a lot of those smaller businesses, and how do they embrace it and be able to use it and say, hey, this is gonna be a threat to what I do. But I respect, our institutions, and then not how do we do it for one institution, but how do we move it forward for the whole state of Louisiana, and still not letting our kids losing the ability to be able to think and to analyze and to not become lazy and become efficient at what they do.
So I'm smiling because 2 reasons. One, I wrote a book. It's called AI plus EQ for the win. Like literally, so thank you. I don't know you, right? So, my publisher. You just nailed it. It's the combination that's gonna win. But that's a mindset. That's you saying, you know what? I'm gonna take what I need for this to make me really, really good. And then the funny thing, Wednesday night I had my students write a letter with a pen to someone that they just wanted to be grateful for. Guys, I had to give them a tutorial on how the front of the letter looked. I didn't assume I would, so I'm with you in that line. Like, we need to kind of continue to instill some of the old school things that we did, because when you do that, you win. You win.
The key, by the way, when I said that, you told me, don't stop things. You got to keep pushing forward. Maybe I didn't explain it as articulately.
Touche.
So I apologize. We got to keep thinking, I think the key, though, really is AI is a tool. We need to remember that it's a tool. It's not a substitute for us. And so when it comes down to the question of how we treat people and how we engage with data, that's really about parenting, and that's about how we raise our kids, and not so much about technology. Technology is a tool. We have to keep that in mind.
I'm a technologist in all things that can solve most of our problems, probably to a fault. But I'm also a realist in that we're 50 years into word processing, and we still can't copy a bulleted list from one application to another and have it format properly. And so that's why I'm like, I think we'll be all right for a few more decades. I'm much more concerned with. I watch my kids, right? I watch my kids watch, like Instagram Reels or TikTok or whatever, and it just turns them into like a drone. But generative AI is conversational. It's interactive, and so you at least have this back and forth call and response that requires, attention and intentionality, whereas doing this, in the rabbit hole that is TikTok, I think is a very different technology.
Yeah, I think, so I mentioned earlier about working with my daughter last night on her homework, and it's so much better than doing this on TikTok, right? And I will say, to the school's credit, is that she was using it in the right way. She wasn't using it to get an answer that she could then write down and turn in. She was using it to double check her thought process, to make sure that when she got the wrong answer, she wanted to find out why. And it was very good at showing this is you missed the 6th step or whatever. And so I think our educational system will eventually figure out how to teach us to use these tools in the right way. We'll end up in a better spot.
Okay, I'm gonna hop in here and say education is the way out. I had Henry come and talk to my MBA class this past year. I don't know if you remember this interaction, but in front of the class, he turns and says, well, I'm sure your professor lets you use AI class. And I just looked at him and said, actually, I don't. And I get a little stunned at the moment, but my reasoning is this. The students don't have domain knowledge. So they can put stuff in, but they don't know if what they're getting out is adequate or not. So in my class, even though I teach this stuff and I write about this stuff, the prerequisite to use AI is to tell me how AI works. Tell me the bias, tell me the source of the bias, tell me what you're gonna do to overcome the bias, then you can use it. So there's an educational component, and that's why I think education and workforce all go hand in hand with this. Because one of the biggest ways we can mitigate fear is through knowledge. And so the more we can teach about how this is and how it's not scary, and there's got downsides, but it's education that's gonna get us there, right? And it's interesting, just tying some of these things together at a personal level. You may say, well, you know, of course you're a professor, you care about education, right? Of course that's what you're gonna push. Just for some context, my grandfather were 6th grade educated farmers in Hungary. They spoke no English. My grandfather in the 40s was recruited to actually fight on behalf of the Russians in World War II. He escaped, came back to his camp, and they actually escaped into Germany. My dad spent his first 6 months of his life in a rail car because they got caught multiple times and sent back multiple times. Ended up in West Germany, and in 18 months, my dad was brought into America along with his family. And I went to Ellis Island and actually saw the ship, the logs from the ship when he came in. They were in rural Pennsylvania, and my grandfather actually ended up being a trucker, and my grandmother was a factory worker. They spoke no English. They were 6th grade educated. My dad was the first to go to college. He got a master's degree at Virginia Tech. He ended up working for NASA and worked his way up to become the chief of staff for NASA. In one generation, look at the role that education played. My dad passed away in December, but the legacy of what he had gone through and my grandfather had gone through was to instill the importance of education and pushing ahead. My now 18-year-old son, who will be a freshman at LSU this fall, has already declared his major is going to be AI. So at 16, he knew 30 programming languages that I didn't teach him. So I decided one day, as every good father does, to humble my son. I said, I'm gonna get you to meet someone who's better than you with AI. So he went to go meet the head of AI at LSU. For 45 minutes they talked. I came in the room and she wanted to know when he could get his PhD. He was 16. Okay, the reason I tell this story is the role of education is pivotal here. In 2 generations, I saw a change in my family. When I was writing my dissertation, my grandfather said, I listened to Hitler on the radio, and you're teaching the next generation how to think. That's change. Imagine if we take that change out across the state. Imagine if we take that to our high schools, our middle schools, these areas that are left behind, and we actually teach about AI and get this state moving. I call myself a techno-optimist because I think the future is amazing for the state. If we could all work together in this room to do, imagine if the 150 of us would walk out here today to truly embrace change and say we're gonna do it. Imagine a year later what this room could look like. We could have students and companies just lined up talking about the amazing things. But it's only gonna come if we really use today as momentum. And so I would truly hope that we do use today as momentum for all that as well.
Just have a question for maybe some of the businesses that may be in the audience or government agencies, and just anecdotally approaches to pricing for integration, and maybe some examples of cases that you've been involved with and ROI on that investment.
So I can speak to that for sure. So we build one of 2 ways. My preferred way is to take the challenge, like we're doing with Jude's B1, and say, here's the design, we align on it, they agree. And when we're done, I'm gonna hand Jude the source code. So it's early, but I want him to put that on his books, his balance books, to say, this is an asset. Now, that's different than the traditional SaaS landscape, where I would go, okay, per seat, per user, per month. I think AI has come to upset that apple cart because I just don't think it's good for the customer. So in that environment, that needs to be retrained and maintained because it's going to be a long time before we get to a period where it can do it by itself. The other way is to do a more traditional SaaS, which I don't like. We don't do a lot of that. So when it gets to business minds and some governments' heads around is, you're building your first virtual employee. Because if you think about labor, it's like, Andrew wants you to do 10 things, and he'll pay you X to do those 10 things. That's the way we offer jobs. Why shouldn't we say, let's deconstruct those 10 things and say, if I can automate 7 of them, then there's a price for it, and then the business should own that. Because it doesn't break up with his boyfriend, it doesn't go to your competitor for 25K more. It's much more efficient. So that's our preferred way that we do that. I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Yeah, I would say it's interesting that you would say that because I don't think we ever talked about it that way, but that's exactly how I think about it. You know, if there's something that I would like to be done, in the old days I would have hired somebody to go do it or multiple people. For this particular project that we're working on, which is really, I would call it kind of a baby step, where we have a closed model, you call it?
Closed loop, large language model.
Yeah. And so we're feeding all of our policies and procedures and our employee handbook into it, so that as I have new employees or even older employees that have a question about policy, instead of trying to sort through this maze of how I get an answer, they can just ask. And I think that's going to be wonderful for onboarding of new employees. In particular, we do acquisitions, and so as we bring on new banks, it's going to be powerful. But my equation, when I thought about the pricing, was not, there's no way for me to know, is this a good deal or a bad deal? All I could do was say, if I were going to hire somebody to do it, how much would it cost me? And does this seem like a better deal, particularly when I can scale it? And the truth is, it wasn't a hard choice at that point, right? And I think part of our obligation as employers is to think about it that way so that we don't end up in a situation where, the scary part from a job standpoint for AI is that you're going to cut a bunch of people and use AI. But if we can start incrementally adding AI capabilities and make that choice, then we end up hiring people for better reasons, which means we're going to keep them a longer period of time. And we don't have to come back and make this cut, which is really the scary part about AI. So that's a great way to think about it, I think.
Yeah, that's a huge point from our perspective. If you look at, we're a small department. We're not an operational state agency in that, like, we're not, keeping street lights on. We're not fixing roads. We're not making sure that hospitals operate. We're 150, 160 people. We're a strategic agency that also processes tax credits. But if you look at our headcount inside of that 160, the majority of those folks are transactional, right? So they're folks who process tax credits. They deal with compliance for tax credits. They work with the Department of Revenue to make sure those things are issued, all the reporting that's involved there. But what you really want a department like ours doing is being sort of flipped. You want people that are recruiting businesses here. You want people that are working to, provide services to small businesses to get them more efficient. You want more people that are in the field dealing with businesses than you want processing transactions. It's just a better use of that allocation. I'm not saying we want to get rid of heads in our department. In fact, I'm fighting to get more heads in our department, but we want those heads on the non-transactional stuff, right?
It'll be a great irony if the use of technology actually enables more person-to-person contact.
I think it will. I think for us it will. Yeah, totally. Because we're battling with this, rolling out a Salesforce license for the whole department right now, and it's painful. I'm like, why are we dealing with that? Let's just feed all this, because we're not super users of a CRM. Let's just feed all this stuff into some AI and let it, like the unstructured stuff, rest in there, and then let's just build some actionable, repeatable things out of that instead of paying for. I'm sorry, the Salesforce guy's still here somewhere.
And I have to, 30 seconds on. So if you're in the room and you're not going to be a weapons-grade Python coder, but you want to figure out how to play picks and shovels. Let me give you the theory. In the 1840s, if the three of us are buddies and we're in Louisiana, we hear there's guys in California finding golf ball-sized nuggets of gold. So me, Jude, and Josh are like, let's get a horse and let's go. We go out there. 1 in 10,000 find gold. Every single one of them had a pick in one hand and a shovel in the other. The rich guys found gold. The wealthy sold picks and shovels. And there was a German who also made the trip to San Francisco. He noticed the khakis that Chad wore ripped in the creek beds. So Levi Strauss made denim. Wealth, not riches. So there's a ripple effect here. I mean, even the upskilling portion that Andrew talks about with education, somebody's got to teach all these people how to use it. You don't have to be a technologist to do that. You have to have relationships and good with people. Sorry to point you, ma'am. So I am really passionate about picks and shovels, and that's a little sidelight where the Louisianians, who tend to have a little culture, a little moxie with them, can win. And you can too.
Very good. Let's thank the panelists for sharing their insights today.